Hi, I want to do this video on determinism, and I wanted to discuss two different points concerning determinism, and the 2 points are the proof that determinism is true and real, and it's the thing that we abide by in every action that we take, and I want to discuss the arguments used against determinism, usually the common arguments used against determinism, and maybe why they're used to manipulate, distort, misconstrue, and maybe even confuse to an extent the argument. And it's not, and maybe why it has a lot to do with people's personal opinions rather than what they consider and recognize as the truth. So I want to discuss why I think determinism is true, and the proof and the facts that we deal with on an everyday basis, just from our own experience, past, present, and the future, and why it's relevant to discussing why it's true. So determinism is pretty much the idea that since the beginning, say from a theoretical Big Bang, right, that once you push the first dice, the rest of the dice have already been predetermined. So once you push the first one, the last one has already been laid down, and the last one's already in place, and it knows exactly where it's going. The consciousnesses, the sentience that's playing the game, since it did arrive, doesn't know. They're in the game. And that's why I'd argue why when we use, from our own perspective, understand that free will is something that we have. I have free will to touch something over here. I have the free will to touch something over here, from my own perspective. Even if you're locked in a cage and you can't move, you have handcuffs behind your back, you're almost doing a magic trick, you still have the freedom to do anything you want. You can try, you could still emotionally react. You have the free will within the constrictions that you were given. The things that have led up to you, within this deterministic reality that we're living in, universe, it's led you up to where you are, and it's giving you the reactions that you're reacting with, and then the reactions that you have to the circumstance that you're in, based off the sentient being reacting, have to do with all the moments that have accumulated to get you to the point to where you are now. And regardless, looking into the future, there's going to be something that happens inevitably, no matter what. Same thing within the past. And that's why I'd argue determinism is only something other than an idea to live by, is something that you have to consider only when you're looking back in the past. Looking back at something that already happened. Because you can look at it like, well, that's the way it was going to happen. And the thought that you have about thinking about the past is that's part of the determinism too. That's the way it was going to happen. Okay, so it wasn't exactly the way I was projecting into the future what was going to happen, or foretold from my crystal ball, but it was something, it happened a certain way, and now I can look back and recognize it and say that was going to inevitably happen because it's what happened. This whole idea of branching paths is something that you can use when you're looking outside, from the outside. Other than that, with no other contextualization of some greater universe outside being controlled by the same mechanism. Sort of like you playing a video game or something and choosing the outcomes. Within the universe, the video game's in our universe as well, sort of like I said, the bigger universe outside the universe, the video game's inside, and we're making choices in a fictional world that we're playing in a video game, and we're choosing different outcomes. It's different, but we're contextualizing it from a universe inside of a universe inside of a universe, or an environment inside of another environment. And it would be contextualized different if it was from an outside point of view. From the outside point of view of the video game, there's obviously different choices, but once you've made the choice in that particular manner, the thing is you can always go back. You can move your arm, and that's part of the argument I was trying to make. Is that things have led me up to making this arm movement, based off the argument I was making, based off my accumulated past experience leading me up to this moment, making this arm to prove this point. I can always undo the arm. Sort of like determinism applies to things like, oh, I'm sick now. Well, you can go on sick, you can fix the problem, you can make it back to where it was, maybe not exactly, but you can fix the problem. Or like, I cut off my arm. And now deterministically, that's something that's happened. But when it comes to the physical being of that, it's obviously your arm's missing, but you can always, if we find some sort of technological breakthrough, we can regrow arms back exactly the way they were, then in a way, that problem is solved. And I think that's one of the things that confuses people about determinism, is this idea of it's just movement. All we're doing is moving. There's this concept of time is just movement, and that's all we're doing. We're playing out the role that we were given, and we're just going one step at a time. And the future is something that we project towards, and it's something that we're doing right now. We're making the action. And the present, I think I know from some I don't know, from some source, that even when in the present, you're always in the past. So the present is already in the past when you're experiencing it, something that's already been predetermined, not just by the standards of determinism, but from our own perception. We don't recognize it, but it's something that's happening already. So I would say, beyond that, the past is we're constantly living in the past, I guess. I'm trying to maintain my point in this video. So, the point is determinism is something that you can prove with every action that you're taking. Everyone knows when you do something, you have an effect on the universe or something around you. You have an effect, and it has an effect on everything. Sort of like the butterfly effect. Everything's affecting everything. One thing leads to another, which leads to another, which leads to another. And the only thing we can do is react within the circumstances of the actions that have left a mark on us, the cause and effect that have led up to our very own existence and our consciousness. And that's one of the things those are one of the things, and we react within the confines of the other actions that have acted around us, all the cause and effect. We cause an effect, and it causes an effect on someone else, and it bounces right back onto us. So we have an effect, everything else has an effect, but it's all playing the game. We're on a chessboard, I guess you would say. We're being manipulated by the outside forces based on this cause and effect. I wouldn't say outside forces, I would say we're being manipulated and we're playing out a role that's already been predetermined. And even though it's cause and effect, it's something that's already been, the dice have already been rolled, and you're the one playing out the game, even though you don't recognize it. And I think that brings me to the point about the free will thing. You obviously know from your point of view that you can do whatever you want within the confines of of the situation that you're in. So even though you don't know, even though you can understand the concept that you're in a universe that's already been predetermined, and how it's a good concept to use when it comes to making decisions in your life, more decisions that you're likely not to regret, then you're likely to use that in favor and make something better of the situation and understand the overreaching possibilities of what you're doing and your effect on everything around you, especially when it has to do with other things that are existing and having an effect on you as well. So this free will thing, you obviously, from your own point of view, from your own perception, you have free will. It's just that you don't... that's from our perception. We have free will from our perception. No matter how much you think, how much you're caged in somewhere, you obviously can manipulate and do things, and you can still have free thought. You can still think. You have free will within the boundaries of the cause and effect that have lain before you, that have affected you. So no matter how much the effects on the outside, based off also the effects that have led you up to where you are, based on the outside forces, say other things, based on your body, and the inside things that have been affected by other things, and all these effects and causes are mixing together and are being meshed together, and it creates what we call the game, and the beginning and the conclusion, and that's what we're playing out right now. We're playing as the pieces on the chessboard, and we're knocking things over, and we're doing things, being manipulated by the forces that are there, the predetermined forces, the forces that are moving us, which is on whatever level you want to look at it on, the atomic level or on the human level, where we are in our own bodies, looking through our own eyes and looking at everything around us and reacting. And that's the point. That's the part that matters, is the perception of the person making these judgments and making these realizations and making these perceptions and experiencing them themselves. And so many of these arguments that people confuse with is, many people use use examples that, well, it doesn't matter. So consent, doing things, murdering people, doing all sorts of things, has no effect. It doesn't matter anymore. It's irrelevant. Once you consider a universe deterministic, it doesn't matter what you do. But like I said, from your own perception, your hands are not tied. You don't know what's going to happen, right? Things are going to happen a certain way. Sort of like if you decide that it doesn't matter anymore, apparently determinism had an effect on you when you start going out and raping people and murdering people. Apparently the idea had such an effect on you that it determined that you would go insane and do something completely ridiculous. And deterministically, the cops would arrest you and you'd go in jail and you'd probably hang yourself in your cell, and that was determined to happen. No matter how you look at it, your choices still do matter, and you're still the one in the game. From your own perception, you still have these choices. And you still have your past effect, the past causes that have caused the effect of where you are in your current situation. And this current situation obviously has an effect on the future as well. And so when you take that into consideration, I guess, when you consider all these things and the deterministic universe around you, I'm trying to lay my bearings because I'm just going off on it. So when you would deterministically do that thing, and obviously it was predetermined to begin with that you'd go insane and do whatever you were going to do. Obviously had an effect on you, and it was laying out before, but from your own perception, your hands aren't tied. They aren't being manipulated like puppeteer strings, moving from one place to another, doing something that you have no control over. You're not a puppeteer. Your arms aren't moving. Your arms aren't moving. And from your own perception, you can know if your arms are moving beyond your control and you end up murdering someone or doing something completely ridiculous based off the idea that your consciousness has come to conclude, and your body somehow takes over and decides to act out the lack of determinism. All of a sudden, once you start arguing against this determinism, even though you know that rape is wrong and murder is wrong, and all of a sudden just because of this idea that you are confusing, even though you understand that rape is wrong, that you are using the fact that consent doesn't matter and manipulating that idea and saying it doesn't matter, all because you're arguing against a deterministic universe and a deterministic concept. You know rape is wrong. You're not going to start raping just because consent doesn't matter anymore. You're not just going to say that choice doesn't matter, and you're not going to start raping people or doing something completely ridiculous that you wouldn't do. You're not going to, cut off your finger and say it doesn't matter and say it was all deterministic. You're not going to make a silly decision. Your hands, you have control of your hands, and on the human level, you know exactly what you're doing, and you know you're not being manipulated by anything but yourself, except for obviously all the things that are going on around you. But you do have control over, and other than letting the idea dominate you, the idea of coming up with a conclusion. Let me go off to a different point, just so I get this point out of the way, and I might go back to the previous point, because this is quite an incoherent video so far, but I'm just trying to get all these points in at once. And I have nothing else to work off of, so I'm just trying to remember everything from the back of my head. So it's sort of like sitting there, and because deterministic, all of a sudden to these people using this as an example, they confuse the concept, and they all of a sudden think, well, deterministically, I've made it this far, and I know exactly how I make breakfast every morning. I know I have to get the bowl of cereal out. I have to get the box of cereal. I need to pour it into the bowl. I need to get milk. I need to pour the milk in. I need to use a spoon. But apparently, in a deterministic universe, once you argue this point, your perception changes, and all of a sudden, in a deterministic universe, an argument to manipulate the concept of it to begin with, you can just magically sit there, and if someone in a crystal ball says that you're going to have breakfast this morning, but you're just going to say, well, I'm going to have breakfast this morning, but I'm going to sit here and wait, and I'm not going to do anything. I'm just going to want the cereal to magically pop up in front of me. I don't think it's going to work that way, especially when you're the only one that knows you want to eat breakfast. No one else is there to manipulate this other than you. So the bowl of cereal isn't just going to magically appear in front of you. You're going to have to make it yourself. And just because someone says it's deterministic doesn't mean it's going to happen magically. I would say that's exactly what the people arguing against determinism are arguing in favor of, or that's what they're arguing, that things just sort of happen. You have the free will to do things. That things just magically appear. You have the free will, but the free will, like I explained, is something of a perceptual thing. I don't want to confuse the argument by myself, because I'm confusing some things right now, trying to remember these exact points I want to make. So, yes, we do live in a deterministic universe, even though from our point of view, our own eyes, our own feelings, our own perceptions, the only way that it would make sense is if a puppeteer all of a sudden started having control over your arms, started moving whatever direction, and you just started thinking. You were no longer conscious of your own decisions. You obviously know that's what you're not what you're doing. You don't all of a sudden think that doing something that you wouldn't originally do is all of a sudden the correct thing to do, just because of an argument brought forth by the idea of determinism and things like this, how everything's predetermined. You're not just going to go out and do something to prove the point wrong. And that's almost an assumption. When I'm assuming that, it's because I'm assuming based off the idea that they say things like consent don't matter. It's all irrelevant. It's not all irrelevant. Sort of like you being thrown in jail because you violated a crime is not irrelevant. You're still going to suffer the consequences, and the consequences still exist in this universe. And just because you went insane and thought that it was a good idea just to, almost in a way, confuse yourself into thinking that it doesn't matter all of a sudden, if you confirm the idea and confuse the idea enough that determinism doesn't mean anything. Is that the point I'm trying to make? It might be the point I'm trying to make. I don't know, but it doesn't change, and things aren't okay all of a sudden just because everything has been laid out as predetermined. It's still a crime, and you're still in your point of view. Nothing's changed just because you understand this concept of things mattering. You still know you're going to feel guilty. You're going to take consequences. You're going to deal with the consequences of your actions, regardless of the forces that be, such as the forces of determinism and things happening based off of a predetermined flow of events, like cause and effect. So I think I may have covered everything. I have no idea. I might have missed something. Obviously, this was an incoherent video, but I'm still getting used to these videos, and I want it to be as natural as possible. So I think I made every point. I think I didn't forget anything. I might have forgotten something. Let's try and remember. Did I forget anything? Obviously, the free will thing, cause and effect, everything leading up to a moment in time. Obviously, things are caused. From our own point of view, we have free will. We can do something no matter the situation we're in. Even if you're a body and you're paralyzed, you can't see, you can't hear, you're blind, deaf, you're paralyzed, you can't move. Doesn't matter. You can still think, and if you're not thinking, things are going to take the flow that they would to begin with. So it doesn't matter. Things are determined, regardless of your perception or not. And I think the confusion of these arguments is obviously, like I said, the bowl of cereal analogy that I used, and confusing the arguments in different ways, such as the example of the cereal and confusing the argument. I can't remember right now, but I mentioned it in the video, and I'm just trying to remember. But determinism is something that, based off of past events, led to an event, and since all these other things are all, in a way, it's all in a bowl, and every time you stir, it's affecting everything with a spoon. You have a bowl of milk and cereal. It's affecting everything. Everything's affecting everything. If it's one big ball, you're shaking it, and everything's just bouncing against each other. If you have a bunch of smaller balls inside of a bigger ball, and you just sort of shake it around, it's going to keep all these different pieces are going to either miss or hit and have an effect on each other. And everything's a cause and effect. It's just constant movement that we keep on interacting with. So I think that's all I needed to mention in this video, and I'm sorry for the incoherence and these long pauses trying to think about things, but I'm still trying to get these arguments and trying to present them in front of a camera and trying to remember everything without any notes, all sorts of things. So I think that's all I needed to mention. I do appreciate you watching. And I hope it was coherent enough that I made a decent point without confusing too much and changing the subject too often or talking too fast. So that's all I need to mention. So that's it. Bye.